Hi, Andre. How's it going? Just doing a little bit of map making for a client right now. Hey, Pen and Blade. Pen and Blade, I just saw your channel recently. It's actually pretty cool. Pen and Blade has a lot of cool map making videos out there. Camera's getting off center here. All right. Yeah, Jared Blando is really good. He's a real pro. How would you fix a mistake made with this pen? Oh, you don't. You don't fix it. It's just a happy accident. You got to find a way to work it in. Although, I mean, I have a sketch that I'm working from. I have this like smaller sketch here. So I basically know where everything goes. And any minor mistakes that creep in, I can usually work into the landscape and kind of make it something else. It's usually not a big deal. I mean, just practice a bunch before you really lay something down. I mean, if it's a really big deal, I guess you can use whiteout. Or, I mean, you can always scan it later and then correct it in like Photoshop or something. But, it's usually not a big deal. The trick is to create like these ridge lines that are fairly rough and just kind of irregular. Because because what's fun about them is that once you go in to put the slopes in later, you really get surprised by the kinds of shapes that you end up with, right? Like I wouldn't think to arrange these mountains in this configuration, but I'm kind of forced to because of the way that the ridgeline is. So you end up with a little bit of surprise for you, the map maker, which is fun. Hey Dan, how's it going? I mean, I'm not doing a tutorial or anything today. I'm just literally just doing some work for a client. And I figure I'd just put it online, see if anyone else wanted to see my process. And I'm happy to answer any questions people have about whatever. How do I lay the mountain curve? You mean like where the actual ridge line is? I mean, when I do that, I'm basically looking at like a sketch I have where I've sort of figured out where I want the mountain ranges to be. And then I just sort of fill that in with some ridge lines. And then I just sort of add the slopes coming off of that. These aren't the final mountains, by the way. These are basically just the outlines. Later on, I'm going to go back over this whole map and use like a really fine pen, like maybe a number 1 or something like that, to add a lot more texture to the side of all the mountains. So you have more of the granularity of like how the slope is moving down, and just add a little bit of roughness and texture. And then I might use some shading pens as well to add more 3-dimensionality. So something like this. It might be something like what I'd end up with. These are some, practices that I've been doing. Because that shading really does add a lot and really makes them pop out a bit more. How did I get into the fantasy realm? I don't know, man. I wish I could get into the fantasy realm. We're looking for a wardrobe all my life. What's the scale? I'm not really totally sure about the scale. The client said that this big continent at the north here, this big area, is going to be roughly like Europe, or at least can be like that. Like Germany is about this big. So I don't know, something like that. And this is like Poland, and then like this is like a bigger version of Greece. So it's sort of a fantasy Europe, I guess. You ever plan to shape what shape you want your coastlines to be? You just improvise them. Oh, I definitely plan them out, right? Like in this case, again, here's the sketch I worked out. I just talked to the client, and they had a particular idea in mind where they wanted a big continent. They wanted like a north with mountains in it, and they wanted, a couple different like fantasy realms here, and they wanted like Egypt like down here. And then I usually started with some thumbnails. So I would draw a sketch of what the coastlines were, but very, very small. And once I had like a shape that I liked, I would blow it up so it was bigger and then add more detail. And then finally I'm on like the really big version, right? Once I generally know where the coastlines are, then I just add a bit of variation and, irregularity as you go around. Add little inlets, you add little, spikes of land coming out, add little islands, off the coast, things like that. There we go. So, I mean, what I would probably add later on is like some foothills, some like little hills over here, and just like some rough terrain. So the mountains aren't just like sticking out of the landscape by themselves, because it's usually surrounded by like rough terrain and stuff that is going to blend it into the lower landscapes more cleanly. But like I said, I'm just sort of doing the outline of all the mountains right now, and then I'll do more detail work later, probably some other day. How much does it work like this? So this is an A2 piece of paper. So I'm not in the UK, so I don't normally have A2. It's like 16 and a half inches by like, I don't know, 23 inches or something like that, or 22 inches. And this one's going for like $400. Normally what I do is like a full poster board size map, which is 22 inches by 28. And I usually do those for $500. But it really depends on what you want. Like if you want a ton of detail, price might be a little bit higher. You know, if you want it to be a lot simpler, it might be lower. So it's really about working with the client, figuring out what they want. But I mean, roughly speaking, I do fantasy maps. If you just want like an 8.5 by an 11 map, I mean, this is a sketch, but if you want like a really detailed map on something this big, it's usually about $100. And then you can kind of extrapolate from there how much a bigger one would be. But, you know, there's variation in the price. Do I have a video on the mountain shading? You know, I haven't really. It's been a thing I've been doing more recently where and I have a video on how to do the mountains where you do the ridge line, then you add like the slopes coming off them. That's one of my most popular videos actually. But I haven't really done one with the shading. I don't think. You just use these brush pens. So it's fairly straightforward, but maybe I'll do one later because I did some tests here and they did turn out really nice. Turns out a big trick to it is that you do it in 2 layers. You do like a really light shadow using one of the lighter pens, and then you do like a darker shadow up near the top of them. And that sort of gradation in tones looks really good, apparently. I just sort of discovered that. It's really easy to do. Yeah, the shading looks really good. And like all you need is like brush pens. Like this doesn't take any particular skill. Just the pens themselves look really nice. Just that gray tone. It's like having a gray watercolor, basically, but it's all just like in a pen. A lot more convenient. Okay, where are my other mountains gonna go? We got mountains there, there, there. I got some mountains up on these islands. Let's move over to these islands. Just a couple mountains here. I mean, when you have a large island, it's fairly common to have them be mountainous, right? Because they tend to kind of emerge from the sea, either from volcanic activity or they're just like, you know, a higher elevation. So it's pretty common to have mountains on them. So we add like a couple mountains there, maybe just like a few right over here. Mikey, like I said, maps like this go for $400 to $500 for the most part. At least that's what my prices are right now. They might change in the future, but at the moment, that's what they're going for. Let's see. Let's see, Brian. For the most part, people contact me. I mean, I have contact info on my about page if people want to do that. I mean, this is pretty standard. For example, if you want someone to do an illustration for you, like black and white, fairly detailed, time intensive, that takes up about a whole page, $100 is pretty normal for that. That's not unusual at all. And since these maps are 4 to 5 times larger, I charge $400 to $500. I mean, they take a long time. There's a lot of man hours that gets put into it. How would I draw sea cliffs on a map like this? I haven't really done sea cliffs that much. And that's for the most part that the maps I'm drawing are like continent size. And on a continent, you wouldn't really be able to see sea cliffs. They'd just be too small. So if you drew in sea cliffs, it would make the landscape look a lot smaller than it actually was. So that's something I'm generally avoiding. I mean, by and large, you'd probably just do something like, I don't know. These are other mountain tests I was doing. If you had a coastal outline, like that's like the outline of a coast or something, you would just add little like vertical lines going down. Something like that, right? It makes it look like it's popping out a little bit. But, that would be my first pass at it. I would probably try a couple different techniques to figure out something that worked. But yeah, it makes your land look a lot smaller because, or your cliffs are huge, right? They're full on cliffs of insanity. Let's see other questions. What are the lines around your coastlines? Oh yeah, those are just wave lines. It's more of a stylistic thing, right? It shows the waves coming up on the shore, so it makes it much clearer where the land is and where the ocean is, right? So it makes it clear that this is ocean. Sorry, this is ocean because you got land, and then you got like these thinner and thinner lines going out to sea. It's just a stylistic thing. I think it makes the water look wetter, I guess. Let's see, have you ever considered digital map making like on Illustrator? Yeah, I've thought about it. It's just like there's a lot of technology overhead, right? Like I'd need to get a nice tablet. I need to buy Illustrator. And Illustrator has like a subscription now. So that's like a per month cost to even have Illustrator. And then I have to spend, probably weeks of time learning all the ins and outs of it. And it's just more than I need right now. It's just not necessary for me. And I really like drawing things by hand. I find it really relaxing. So that's just where I'm at. I've been doing this since I was a kid, so I'm just used to it. Let's see, what number of pens do you employ for the coast and then breaking waves? I mean, I use thicker ones and then thinner ones. So the coastline is just 5, and then I use a 3 and then a 1. I think is what I use for those. Seem to work pretty well. You're just going down 2 points per line, I guess. I'm not even totally sure what the numbers represent. Let's see other questions. Yeah, I don't do this for fun. I mean, I do it for fun. I do enjoy it. But I mean, it's a lot of work. If you want me to do one of these, it usually takes me, around a month or so. I'm not working constantly. I work a little bit every day, add a little bit more. I kind of revise it. I look at it, add a little bit more, change things here and there until I feel like it's really ready. Usually takes me about a month of work off and on. So you put a lot of time and effort into them. Yeah. Let's see. True Nordic. Oh, thanks, True Nordic. That's nice of you. Ooh, a map for Pokemon fan fiction? That'd be fun. If you're doing maps for Pokemon fan fiction, I might be tempted to use like one of the digital map makers, especially like Hexkit. I did a video a little while back of Hexkit, which is a map maker that uses like hexagons if you want to do like a hex crawl. And there's a skin for it or tiles for it that are all done in pixel art style. And it looks incredibly cool. And it looks like it would work really well for Pokemon because Pokemon is like all pixel art. At least the old stuff was. So that would be neat if you wanted to kind of get thematic with it. Changing the subject. Do exist something like paid game mastering over there? Over where, Andre? Like in the US? I know paid game mastering is definitely much more of a thing than it used to be. It's not like super mainstream, but I definitely know some like YouTubers who do it for sure. I know Andrew from Dawn Forge Cast does it or did it. He was quite popular. I think he's still doing it. I've seen newspaper articles about people who do it professionally, like they do it 5 days a week, and they just have like a rotating schedule of houses that they just show up with all their stuff, and they do game mastering. So it's becoming more and more of a thing, but it's only possible because the game is like really blowing up right now, and a lot of people want to get into it but don't want to have to like learn it. So you can just call up a game master. But I mean, it's not cheap. If you're going to call someone to do, like 4 hours of intensive work, and they have to put hours of work, into that before they even show up at your house, you're going to be paying a lot per hour, So most people, it wouldn't be for most people just because it's the cost. Though I suppose if everyone in the group chipped in, it wouldn't be as bad. How do I donate? Oh, if you want to donate to my channel, man, I have a Patreon. So it's just patreon.com/questingbeast. And I have a lot of cool stuff. We have a really sweet Discord. It was just gonna be a way for me to chat with Questing Beast fans, but it's like really taken off. And there's tons of really awesome, like high level discussion about mechanics and role playing in general. And there's a whole board on there just for people who are designing their own RPGs. It's really cool. And all the patrons get access to that. And I'm also doing a monthly 1-page dungeon where every month I'm putting out like a short little dungeon with some cool concepts in there. And patrons who are at like a $2 level or higher automatically get that. So yeah, that's pretty cool. In Brazil, the paid game mastering business is beginning to happen, and I'm planning on doing it. Yeah, go for it, man. If you can make it work, more power to you. I mean, there's a lot of like people in the US who are just like adamantly opposed to the idea of doing paid game mastering, but I've never really understood that. Like, if you want to do something, people are going to pay you for it. Yeah, I mean, go for it. The idea that like, oh, I would never do it because it's supposed to be, like a free thing you do with your friends. It's like, no, it doesn't have to be free. If you want to do it if you're doing it with your friends, then yeah, you're not going to be paid for it. But if you're going to put in work for strangers, then absolutely no reason you shouldn't be paid. For me, it defeats the point of D&D is paying for a friend. Well, I mean, depends on if you want the game master to be your friend or not, right? If the game master is just there to provide you with a cool experience and you don't have any friends who can game master, then I mean, you're gonna have to pay for it. It doesn't seem like any different than anything else to me. Oh, cool, Andrew. Yeah. The last 1-page dungeon that I did was called The King's Thirst. And so it had like a catacomb thing, it has multiple factions going on in there, and you roll randomly to see like where they start out in this dungeon and like what their attitudes are. And there's a couple like triggers in there for things to all go haywire. So yeah, I was kind of happy with that one. Custos Valentus says, "Do you love Tolkien's world?" Of course. Tolkien was my entry to fantasy. I'm still a big Tolkien fan. I got a big Tolkien map and a big poster on my wall right over here. Other big influences on me as a kid were the Earthsea books. Those are really, really cool. The author Ursula Guin just passed away recently, but she was a genius in the world of fantasy and sci-fi. Other big influences were things like the Prydain books. The Once and Future King was a really big deal. I read a lot of fantasy. Mikey asked, have you ever drawn maps for novels before? I think so. Maybe once or twice a few years ago. I mean, when people commission me to draw maps, my understanding is that by and large it's for their D&D campaigns. That's mostly what people want for these things. But I think I may have drawn one or two for someone who's making a fantasy novel. There's just less call for those in general, I think. Let's see. Let me get some more mountains done here. Let's see. I need a few more mountains. Mountain range isn't dense enough. I add a little more mountains up here, I think, and then I'll flesh it out with some foothills at a later date. get into D&D, but you're from Ireland. Yeah, I mean, it can be tough if you're just in a region of the world where it hasn't blown up like it has in the US recently. I think your best bet would be to look at online games, right? Like on Roll20 or other places. Online D&D is becoming a bigger and bigger thing, and there's lots of tools that make that easier. I definitely prefer playing in person, for sure. But if you really want to learn how to play, there's plenty of online games. So I think you should be able to get in that way. Is that two pieces of paper? Or is there a crease there? No, it's all one big piece of paper. These are just very light pencil lines, because what I did is I have like my sketch here, right? And I needed to translate it to a bigger map. And it's really hard to do to keep it proportional. So I just sort of folded it, right? So I got a fold down the middle, a fold there, and then I got like a fold there and there, right? And so then I just drew the same pencil marks on my big map, just so I have like a rough grid so I can keep things the same proportion. It's an easy way to blow things up by hand. How big is the map? It is an A2 map. So it's like 18 inches by like 20 inches, something like that. No, it's bigger than that. What did I say before? It's 16 by 22, something like that. Not exactly. I mean, it's a British paper size because the client is, I think, from the UK. So, or at least not from the US. So I kind of wish the US used the UK's paper sizes. So the UK's, the way they do paper sizes is really cool. I don't know if you ever looked this up, but like they have A1s or they have A0s, which are really huge pieces of paper. Then A1, A2, A3, A4. And, you know, each number is smaller than the last, but it's always exactly half the size of the last. So, I mean, to show you, it's like, if you got like a piece of paper like this, right? So this would be like one paper size. And then the next paper size down would be like this half of it right here, right? And then the next paper size down would be like this half of it right here. Then the next one would be like this piece right here. So there's like this very clear and like logical progression to how big their paper sizes are. It's really nice, and it's easy to like convert stuff. But in the US, we just like don't make paper in that size. Okay. Pretty good. Let's add some more mountains. Where were they going to go? Here's some mountains going down the neck of this area here. So let's move the camera a little bit. I know, right? If the US switched to metric, it would make everyone's lives a lot easier. It's hard to get all of the Americans on board with it. One of the funny things that I don't know if Europeans know about the American measurement system is that there was a movement to convert everything over to metric. I don't know when it was, like 20 years ago, maybe more, 30 years ago. And so they said, okay, this is going to be tricky, so we're going to do things in stages. So one of the first things that they did is they took all of the like soda bottles, right? Like the Coke bottles, the really big ones, and they made them all 2 liters. And then they were going to continue on from there, but it kind of fizzled out. So now in the US, like everything is in imperial units except for big Coke bottles, which are all 2 liters. That's like the only thing that we have in metric. It's really weird, but that's just like how it worked out. I mean, there is a reason for having the imperial system. Like this gets back into like world building. If you're doing world building for your RPG game, if you look back like historically, like why is it that in almost every culture their measurement or their money systems weren't base 10, right? Because if you look back in all these old cultures, they're really odd units of currency, right? You have like, what is it, 12 pennies in a shilling, and then 20 shillings in a pound. And there's all sorts of like weird intermediary coins, right, in the old British coinage system. And the reason for that, like there's a reason. and that's that the units are much easier to divide, right? Like, for example, the English or the imperial system uses feet, like 12 inches in a foot, right? And then 3 feet in a yard. Well, the cool thing about that is that like 12 is really easy to divide. You can cut it into half, you can cut it into thirds, you can cut it into fourths, you can cut it into sixths, and so on, right? Same thing with yards. Yards can cut into thirds and into half and into sixths and so on. Whereas if you have things just like base 100, it's actually really hard to divide them into things besides like 10 and 5 and 2. So there's a utility to it, but it does make things harder to convert. And measuring things in like feet and hands is like more practical when you don't have like a lot of rulers, right? Because you can literally use your feet or your hands to rough out measurements. Do you shade the mountains? Then yeah, when I'm going to be done with this, I'm definitely going to be using some of these, either some of these brush pens or just using some um, just like cross hashing shading. I'm going to experiment with a couple things before I actually go into the shading. But right now I'm leaning towards using the brush pens just because it looks really cool. Base 60 in Mesopotamia. Yeah, absolutely. Right. The Mesopotamians use base 60 because 60 is awesome because it has so many factors. That's still why we use 60 in our clocks and why we use like 360 degrees in a circle is because it's so divisible. It's just really convenient number to use. So let's use a pencil to sort of figure out about where I want the mountains to go before I start actually putting them in. All right. Yeah, like someone mentioned that I should do a mountain making tutorial with shading, which I thought was a good idea. Maybe I'll do that at some point in the future. Map making video where I show some of my older maps. Yeah, well, you can definitely look back in my channel. I have videos. I think it's called like map making showcase, where I show off maps that I've done, and I have those going back all the way to the dawn of my channel. I think, like the very first 4 videos I made on this channel were me making a map, and it looks really different than it does now. It's a little bit cringy to me, but I'm sure this map will look cringy to me, 5 years down the line, because you're always improving. So what can you do? Let's pause there and let's try and fill these in before I continue. Let's see. How long does it take start to finish to make one of these maps? I've never really tried to work that out. I figured that working off and on, it takes me about a month, but that's, not like continuous time, obviously. I have a full-time job. This is something that I do on the side. So I'm not really sure. I don't know, 10, 12, 15 hours, maybe, depending on the level of detail. It's just like a really rough guess. I usually just put on podcasts or whatever, and I just do this to relax. Tend to rush my ridge lines. Does rushing matter? It might. It depends on the level of detail that you're going for. I usually don't worry about my ridge lines all that much because, how the mountains turn out is mostly in where you put the slopes. I've discovered you just need to have like them to be fairly jagged, so you do get some points for the tops of mountains. Apart from that, it seems to work out pretty well. Yeah, I'm making this map for a specific client, True Nordic. How do you go around doing town names? So I don't put in labels. That's not something that this client wanted to do. If someone really wanted me to put in like labels for all of the mountains and landscapes and towns and stuff, I could probably do that. I would probably increase the price just because that's doing all of the calligraphy for that is a big pain. And it would take like a lot of really careful planning to put everything in, especially since I'm not using like Photoshop and I can't just like lay the words over stuff, and just like have things fade to white in the background. That would be a lot more work on my part, and I would probably just increase the price for it. This client said that he wanted to put in towns and stuff later on, so that's cool. That makes it easier for me. Am I into video games? Yeah, I don't play them as much as I used to, but I'm really into The Witcher 3 right now, so I've been playing a lot of that. Cyberpunk, the new Cyberpunk game's coming out at some point in the future, so I need to finish The Witcher so I can move on to that. I'm really into big open world fantasy games. Do I ever take into the account tectonics and map making? A little bit. I try and make sure I have continents that look like they're fairly coherent and are kind of like, smashing into each other or pulling apart. But I don't worry about it all that much. I mean, you can create whatever rules you want for tectonics and mountain ranges, and you're going to be able to find some continent somewhere where it doesn't follow that rule. So it's really hard to have like a coherent system that's like always going to work because it's just not. The way that actual landscapes work is too weird. Although some understanding of how tectonic plates work can help. Of course, if you're doing an actual fantasy world, then you don't have to follow any of these rules. So, it's really up to you. I should totally do a series where I make a map with the help of chat or Discord. Possibly. Doing that stuff is a lot of work, though. And I've seen other YouTubers do it. And usually what happens is the world is just a total mess. It's just like random stuff all over the place because it's really hard for just a bunch of people to pull together and have like a coherent vision for anything. So it ends up just being really slapdash is my experience of it. Have I done city or town maps? Yes, I have. If you look back in my video history, you can definitely find that. I did a video on how to design cities, at least at the street level. I haven't really done anything on like what a whole city would look like. But for me, at least, working out how a city is going to look is mostly understanding how it's going to work at the street level, like how streets and buildings interact with each other and how like the positive and negative space works. So I do have a video on that. I did do a really big city map, but that was like 3 or 4 years ago. And I probably wouldn't do it that way again. But I have a video of that way back from way back when. What I am proud of on that old city map was I had some really cool names for a lot of the districts. Because it was like a multicultural fantasy city with lots of different like races and different like fantasy races, right, all over the place. So I had to come up with the cool district names where the different, like the orcs hang out over here and the hobbits hang out over here. So I had a lot of fun with that. Yeah, if you want to do climates, that is like a real pain. But I know people who do it, right? If you understand how wind patterns work and how mountains and lands like shift where the wind patterns go. I know people on like the R world building subreddit like work things out like that. It's really impressive when I see it done. I usually just can't be bothered. How to draw volcanoes in the ridge style of mountains. I don't really have a tutorial for doing volcanoes because I've never really had to draw them. That's something I would really have to think about, I guess. I would probably just do something like I mean, you would take a mountain and slice the top off, right? So ah, never mind. Looks like crap. I don't know what I'm doing. What I should be doing is looking at a lot of actual mountains, probably. The only one I can really think of is like Mount St. Helens, which is fairly close to where I grew up. And that has just like the whole side of the mountain is gone. But I'm not totally sure about volcanoes, to be perfectly honest. Never really gave that a shot. Oh, you like my shores? Thank you. Yeah, I've definitely gotten better at doing shores. It's a weird thing getting good at doing shores because you'd think you just make it kind of rough and sort of in and out, but it's not. Like there's a lot of smaller shapes that are sort of built into it. Like take this like little inland sea, for example. There's like lots of different shapes, right? I got like this sort of pointy shape up here at the end, which is kind of cool because you got like this inlet and you got like this sort of like triangular shape sticking in over here. And then you have like, like this inlet over here, like that's its own distinct shape. So you have like these different shapes that are all sort of coming together to make a larger shape. And it should look, coherent at all levels of magnification. And so it's hard to sort of find that balance and just, do a lot of practice, I guess, sort of creating these different shapes in your coastline as you go, like creating little inlets, creating little peninsulas and stuff like that. A really big trick is just to look at a lot of actual maps, right? Like find a place in the real world that is like similar in climate and like latitude to the place where your world is, and then look at what the coastlines look like there. And then because you'll be able to see how they developed over time. I think that can be really helpful. Let's see. It would be a lot of work to manage when you're trying to make it a relaxing, fun thing. I'm not sure what you mean, Andrew. Yeah, the Northlands. Yeah, for sure. It's really fun to look at like the north of like in Scotland, right? And like the Shetland Islands, and especially like the Nordic countries, like Sweden, because they have those crazy coastlines that are caused by all of the glacier action. Those are really cool looking, right? But they're hard to draw because they're so detailed. But if you really study them, you can see how they were shaped, right? Because there were forces that shaped them that way. And so if you can find a way to imitate that in your drawing, then you can really give the impression of like where they are. Let's see. Other questions. Look in the World Builders Guidebook. Oh, it's a complete system for world generation. That's really cool. I don't have that many AD&D books. I have like the original like DMG and Player's Guide and stuff. I don't have a lot of supplemental stuff. Most of my collection is like more modern OSR stuff. But there is some stuff in old like TSR books that is really cool. When it wasn't all just about bloat, which it was sometimes. I've heard about ASMR. Oh yeah, I definitely watch ASMR occasionally. Um, D&D ASMR is becoming a thing, hilariously. Um, I've thought about making like an ASMR video or two doing map making, but it's never actually come out. Water currents. Yeah, the water currents and the way you do coves and bays will definitely determine where ships can go. This can determine like what your civilization looks like, right? So like where you put towns and cities is definitely going to depend on like what your coastlines look like, and especially where your rivers are, since civilization tends to group around rivers and around water naturally. The water erosion thing is part of the equation. We want to go full science. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a reason why, like, when I draw these maps, I tend to do coastlines first. That's just because I need to know where everything is and like how much space I have. But when I start filling stuff in the middle, I always do mountains first, because a lot of the other things, like where forests are and where rivers are, is the result of mountains, right? So I definitely fill those in first because you need to kind of go with the causality, like the order of causality, with how things form when you're drawing your map. That's going to make things look more realistic. And go for it, True Nordic. If you want to do live map making, there's plenty of room for that. Sometimes border on ASMR stuff. Yeah, I guess so. A lot of people get ASMR from like really intentional videos, like watching people do like repetitive tasks, like detail oriented tasks while talking. And I guess map making is, part of that. So it's not surprising that my stuff may look a little bit like ASMR at times, but I'm not really focusing on it. So some people get it even when it's not like whispering stuff, right? It's just like the way that the stuff is presented. And then when they see people who are enthusiastic about something and are explaining it carefully, that can be triggering for some people. Yeah, I mean, you just got to practice True Nordics. You just got to do it a lot. Um, like if you look at some of my early videos, they're kind of crap compared to what my mountains look like now. And that's mostly because what I would do is I would look up other map makers, either on YouTube. There wasn't many on YouTube, but if you look up other fantasy maps drawn by pros and just like look really carefully at their mountains and like how are they doing those mountains, and you'll see tricks. Like you can see like what shapes they're making and like how they're doing that. Or like Mike Shelley, for example, who does most of the D&D, like official D&D maps. He does like this really interesting thing with planes where it looks like doing planes is really tricky. I'm not sure I've really nailed down how to do it because I just put like grass in there, but it looks it's like hard to do graphs that looks right and is at the right scale. And he like textures planes in a way that makes them look like bumpy, like there's little like mounds and hills across them. It's a really neat little trick, and I'm trying to find a way to imitate it. But it's just about studying what other people are doing and finding a way to copy it, and then you slowly start figuring out different tricks. What a dune map would look like society wise. I mean, there are dune maps, like from the novel Dune. It's hard to do sand in a really big map for sure. If you want to just draw sand, at least just label it as sand. I also have a Bob Ross quality of live streams. Yeah, I mean Bob Ross, the king of ASMR. Let's finish up this mountain range here. Also, cool thing to feature is, let's see here, religion-like places. Yeah, like a world tree. Funny enough, this world is actually going to have a world tree. The guy commissioning it wants one all the way up at the top of the world. So I'm going to put one up in the Northlands. Just draw like a big old tree in there. Seems to work for like Norse countries, right? Because you got like Yggdrasil or whatever. Oh, thanks, Raid. Glad it's been helpful. Yeah, it seems like map making on YouTube is taking off a lot more. I know that like WASD20 has been doing more map making videos. He's always been big on it. And I've just seen more and more like smaller channels pop up doing map making, which is really cool. You know, the more resources out there, the better. I just noticed you're using blank paper cover to keep in scale. I'm not sure what you mean by keeping in scale. I mean, the scale of it is mostly determined. I mean, it's somewhat arbitrary. I mean, you can draw your mountains and your features a little bit smaller. That makes your scale look bigger, right? Or if you draw your mountains bigger, that makes your world look smaller. So sort of keeping those proportions can change how things look. Also, like what your coastlines look like. It can change how like what your scale looks like. Like if you look at the coast of Africa, for example, like it's actually really smooth looking when you're really far away from it, right? If you zoom in really close, you're going to see a lot more variation. So that can affect how big things look. Yeah, I mean, like when I did those videos about like how to draw mountains, and I would do like 8 different styles and stuff. Some of them aren't that great, in my opinion. Some of them look a lot better than others. But it was really about me like getting a piece of paper out, and this can be a fun exercise, and to say, okay, I'm going to come up with 8 different ways to draw mountains, and some of them are better and some of them are worse. But at least you're sort of going through all of the different possibilities and figuring out, hey, I'm really good at drawing mountains this way, and I'm terrible at drawing them this way, right? And you can't figure that out unless you try a whole bunch. Or even with forests or any other feature that you want to draw, like just dedicate yourself to doing it 10 different ways and just sort of getting it out of your system, all the different ways that you could handle it. So you have a better sense of what works and what doesn't. And you just explore the possibilities a little bit more. Oh, the Alchemist Repose. Yeah, thanks, David. I ran it with some of my siblings over, what was it, over Christmas or early this year? And it was really fun. Yeah. Like one of my goals in making these one-page dungeons like the Alchemist Repose, which is on Drive Through RPG. You can check that out if anyone else wants to. Is like one of my goals is to have like fairly constrained spaces. It's not like a huge dungeon, but have enough weird and interesting stuff in there that it's fairly consistently entertaining, and to have lots of ways to mess around with stuff, right? There's lots of different aspects to it that could be used in different ways. And there's like triggers that can make everything go haywire in a number of different ways. So there's lots of replayability. And when the game master is running it, the game master themselves is really unsure how things are going to turn out, right? There isn't like one ending to the story. The story could go a million different ways depending on how players mess around to interact with the stuff in the dungeon. That's definitely my favorite kind of dungeon to play in. So I try and write those. Death Frost Doom is a good example of a dungeon like that. That's also one of my favorite dungeons. Andre, if you want to contact me, I have a contact email in my in the on the About tab on YouTube. So go to the front page of my YouTube channel and click on About. There should be a contact email in there. Greetings from Costa Rica. Hey, Marco. Role-playing community is very small. Whether you are soldiering on. Yeah, cool. It's good to see other people in other countries carrying the role-playing banner on. And yeah, if you can't find a group in person, I would check online. That's definitely a bigger and bigger place to play games now. Although a lot of it, man, if you can't find in-person groups, a lot of it is like you got to start them. It's sort of the curse of being the forever GM. But my experience, speaking personally, has been that if you walk up to like a group of people, like at your work or whatever, and you're like, "Have any of you played Dungeons and Dragons?" Like most people like have heard of it, and there's always going to be a couple of people who are like, "I've always wanted to play that," or have played in the past. It's a surprising number of people. So it's actually not that difficult to create a group if you're a GM. If you're a new player, that can be a little bit more tricky. But a lot of people have heard of D&D, and a lot of people have been curious about it their whole lives and have never got to play. So it's actually not too difficult to round up people. Although, of course, finding a group that you really click with can also be an issue, right? Because in my opinion, you should only be playing with people that you really get along with. All right. Let's try and fill in the rest of these mountains. Collect RPGs. Mhm. D20 Modern. Interesting. I've heard a lot of people talked about D20 Modern in particular, though I've never really tried it. Like, is it a classless system? Because it seems like if you're playing like a modern game, having classes wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. Although I don't really see why the D20 system wouldn't work just fine by and large. Yeah, Mad Max style car chases. You know, any sort of action scene that has like a really dynamic element, like automatically improves it, like really quickly, is something that I've discovered. Um, One of my favorite action scenes that I've ever played in was in like a car chase. I think it was like a superhero game, and we were using like the Hero Clicks miniatures, and we had them all set up on like toy cars and trucks and stuff. And then like the cars would dynamically like pass each other and swerve out of the way while there was a fight going on. It was absolutely amazing. So like any sort of dynamic element really spruces things up. Just because we want the battlefield to be changing constantly, so people have to change up their tactics. That's like a really big thing. I would distinguish between a desert and a wasteland and a tundra. Yeah, that's kind of tricky. I mean, I would add maybe like a sand texture. Um, I mean, make snow more like little hills, maybe. I mean, they look pretty much the same. If you look at them from space, they look identical. They're just different colors. So if you're doing like a colored map, that would be the really big thing. Or perhaps labeling them. If you want more of a deserty landscape, a big thing can be add like little rocks, maybe, or like little cactuses. If you want to add a more symbolic element, that can make it read more clearly as a desert. What kind of music do I listen to? I don't listen to a whole lot of music, at least when I'm doing stuff like this. I typically listen to like podcasts or YouTube lectures or stuff like that. In terms of music, like in general, I just enjoy a lot of really eclectic stuff. I'll listen to almost anything. Haven't been into like really researching new music and stuff for a really long time. I remember when I was a teenager, I was really into that stuff, and I would try to keep up on things coming out of the indie music scene and stuff like that. But I haven't done that in a long time, mostly just because my time's taken up with other stuff. I definitely take recommendations though. Always looking out for new artists to listen to. D20 Modern pretty much preludes to the new D&D systems. Okay, so an occupation gives you abilities and feats. Interesting. I never played D20 Modern. Through a process like mountains and then rivers, then forests. Yeah, basically, you got to have the mountains first, because rivers flow from mountains. So you can't figure out where the rivers are until you have mountains. And once you have the rivers down, the rivers are going to help determine like what the topography is, right? Because rivers are going to follow the path of least resistance. So, rivers going to help shape where you're going to put hills and things like that, and vice versa. And then forests, forests have to come last because you're going to put them, usually near rivers, but not necessarily. And there's going to be, they often fill in the space between mountain ranges and stuff. I often use forests as like a way to add texture to places that look kind of boring. So that's mostly what I use them for. I probably should put a little more thought into like what makes sense from a like an ecology perspective, but I don't always do that. Sometimes you can think about things like rain shadows, right? If you got like a mountain range, like right here, and then you imagine that like a lot of wind is coming in from the coast, and it's going to sort of stop at that mountain range, which means there's going to be a lot of rainfall over on this side, which means it's going to be more forested, right? You could think about things like that. All right. Good night, Andre. All right. Let's see. The last mountains are going to be over on this peninsula. So let me get that done. Some mountains up at the top. Mountains down there. Okay. Wrong pen size. Here we go. See you later, Dan. Main enemy would be flowing water. And that is a great idea, actually. Dungeons that have like underground rivers and streams are really cool because you can have like players fall into them and like sweep them away to other places, or you can have like the dungeon, like parts of it filling up with. It's like a really great hazard to throw in there. So that sounds really cool. Good luck with that. Yeah, cave dungeons are a little bit tricky to pull off, Mikey. Mostly because I have a hard time drawing them in a realistic way. I guess you can look at diagrams of actual caves. But tight squeezes and big drops, yeah, absolutely, those are a big deal. I mean, a huge resource for this would be things like Veins of the Earth, which have a lot of really great rules for caving and things like that. Yeah, you have to put something in between the forests and deserts. Yeah, you have to have like transitional climates, right? And those are tricky to draw. Um, I would definitely look at like, pictures from Google Earth of what things look like in the real world. That's my only real tip. I've had to do that a lot. Figuring out what things look like in real life and then just zooming in on it. Google Earth is such an amazing resource for that. You can get like an almost eye level view of anywhere in the world. So like what landscapes actually look like is like no longer a mystery. You can even do things like you can pull up Google Earth and put things into 3D mode so that all the topography and the hills and stuff are three-dimensional. And then you can like tilt the camera so you can see everything in 3D. It's a really amazing. I mean, it looks nothing like fantasy maps is the real takeaway, but that's okay. Let's see. I think that's all the mountains that I really need to do right now. Yeah, that looks like it's about it. All right. Cool. Here, I'll zoom out a little bit so you can get a bigger picture of what everything looks like at the moment. That's the whole continent right now. Looking pretty good. It's going to look a lot better once I start adding more texture, around the mountains and like some foothills and some rough terrain on either side, so they blend in a little bit more and they're not just like all by themselves. And then use a lot of like rivers and streams to sort of anchor them to the landscape and pull things together. But I think that's going to look really good. Okay, I think that's it for me to all that I'm going to do today, guys. Thanks for hanging out, though, and definitely keeping me entertained, keeping me on track. Now that I have the bones of the map done, I can start working on a lot of the other details, which is really the fun part for me. But thanks for hanging out. If you guys want to check out my Patreon, it's down in the description below, or it will be eventually. And keep an eye out for my next video. My next review is still going to be on Do Not Let Us Die in the Dark Night of This Cold Winter, which sounds like a prog rock song, which is kind of cool. And it's going to be about surviving in the wilderness, or surviving in the winter, rather, and keeping like villagers alive. You can use it as like a mini game in between sessions if it's winter. It's a cool little idea. Anyway, that's it. See you guys later. Thanks for hanging out.